This is GAA Embedded on Balls.ie, where we were with you all the way through the summer as we brought you the best analysis in the GAA Championships. We had Shane McGrath on hurling, we had Darren O'Sullivan on football, we had loads of guests as well. But the GAA season isn't over, and one of the guests that we did have on all the way out through the summer was also Maurice Brosnan. And Maurice, delighted to say he's with us again because in fairness, Maurice, the GAA season isn't over. There's lots happening. We're watching Club Championship. It's absolutely brilliant. There's a managerial merry-go-round, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes in both sports, to be honest, in football and hurling. There's all-star nominees. It just never stops at the moment. And it's funny, I was down country last weekend, and you're in the local pub and the local team are playing in the championship in a quarter-final the next day, and I have to say there's more GAA talk than there is in the height of summer, because when it's your local team and when it's like good luck tomorrow, lads, to the guy working behind the bar or the guy you might see walking down the road, it's just such a special thing for the local community this time of year. I'm breaking no news here. I'm just kind of in that sort of excited just being kind of close to it at the moment is just one of those things that I get really, really excited about every kind of October and November, and then sort of forget about come the summer.
That's a great point, Mick. I was actually thinking about this last week. You look at, right, remember at the start of the year there was a lot of surprise actually, when the opening round of the Connacht Championship, Mayo played Leitrim. It didn't sell out. I don't know if you remember that. The people were kind of surprised that people have been starved of football at Mayo, a football obsessed county. Leitrim obviously quite similar, and it wasn't able to sell out. And then you look at last weekend, and I think I was on Twitter midweek, and Westport against Castlebar Mitchells, they stopped selling tickets because that game sold out in Castlebar, Mayo. But I think this comes back to the whole point of this, is that when you get those kind of invigorating competitive games, which is something we might come on to later on, that suddenly it really doesn't excite people. Like I was buzzing watching some of these games back. I watched a couple of the Galway Championship games from here in Melbourne, over the weekend. Like it just has you really excited, and it does, to my mind. I think Gaelic football and GAA as a whole is on the edge of something really big here. Like I do think we could kick on to the next level if a couple of crucial things happen. Fingers crossed. I think Motion B will get through Congress. I'm sure we'll talk about that later again. It reminds me a small bit of, if we get the Spix calendar down, I think you could have an ultra competitive, really exciting championship, and then we go into this club action, which we've all seen is a capability to grab people. And it reminds me a small bit of, a couple of years ago, back in 2016, I got some work in Kansas City, working for a local news station there, right? And that's a football obsessed NFL. I'm talking about here, American football obsessed city. They've nothing else, like no basketball team there, soccer team, but it's very small. And I was arriving in February, and I was really disappointed because I thought, I'm going to miss out on the actual NFL season. It'll bring me, I was 6 months there, bring me right up until the season kicks off, but I actually won't get to see that buzz. And I very, very quickly realized that that's not how it works over there. NFL is a 365 all year round, 24/7 sport. There's talking points regardless. You can set your clock to the seasons around it, whether they go from the end of season fallout, into preseason controversies, into suddenly new managers, how they're going to go. A manager will always do something, they will control the narrative. Sometimes they'll do something deliberately to drum up some hype. Tim Tebow went in as a tight end for the Jacksonville Jaguars when Urban Meyer. I think he was conscious, make a statement here. There was absolutely no chance that was ever going to work this year. And that's something we might actually talk about later on again in terms of controlling the narrative. But I think GAA could do the same thing. GAA could dominate the year in a way that I have to say has me very excited.
Yeah, because some of our other conversations have been about that they, in some ways, are tightening the national focus part of the year by, obviously they have to make room for the club championships. There's no denying that, but maybe it was a bit extreme. But at the same time, if you can make this a wider range, and look, it has to incorporate the county game. It has to incorporate bigger things, because although the club is super exciting, it is a local thing. You're never going to have the same kind of audience for local club games as you are for counties. You're never going to have that neutral view, I would say, as well, in as big a numbers. But there is so much in the county as well, because look, we had, is it Black Sunday when all the coaches get fired in America, in American football, something like that. You've and then we've hiring for a month. Then you have free agency at a very certain time of year when all the players change. You have the draft, so on. That's how they do that 365, like you were saying. we're very much in managerial merry-go-round season at the moment in the GAA. So we're going to get into a little bit of that because there's lots to talk about for both sports. I also want to talk to you about the All-Stars that were named, the nominees for the Hurling anyway, and for the Hurler and Young Hurler of the Year. So we'll get to that in a minute too. And also we'll just talk about this. There's like an absolute plethora of club stories that we could get to. And look, our point is let's play our part in making this a year-round thing. We'll be here with you regularly for the rest of the year as we kind of look, again, not just at like specifically at the club championship. They will create their own stories, but there's lots more going on as well. There's wider issues in the GAA as well. And look, we want to get into it, and we probably have more time at this time of year to delve deeper into it and not just react to what happened on Sunday. So that's what we're looking forward to, Maurice. Are you on board?
Absolutely, yeah. I can't wait.
Good to have our production meeting and finally explain why I've landed you into the show on air. But let's get into some of the managers. We'll start with football because we'll come back to the hurling in a minute when we talk about the All-Stars. But what have we seen so far? There's a lot of jobs still out there to be named. But the biggest one is, as soon as Jack O'Connor left Kildare, I went, hold on a minute, he's got the Kerry job. And then the narrative for a couple of weeks was, I don't think that's true. There's a few other options. He might not even be going for it. Somebody said, they're going to stick with Peter Keane, so on and so forth. But I think sometimes the most simple answer is often the truth. And it did transpire in the end, regardless of what the process was or who told who what or whatever. And there's varying reports. Either way, I would say Jack O'Connor, if he didn't know he had it, thought he had a very good chance and decided he was going to step away from Kildare, go to Kerry. The big question is, we discussed massive problems. Peter Keane, I thought, had a very, very fair statement last week about player support and about what they'd achieved. So, they had a bad year last year, straight knockout, caught in the hop, COVID year, year before extra time or replaying an All-Ireland final, and this year lost to the All-Ireland champions in the semi-final by a point in extra time, right? But that doesn't always tell the exact story. We saw the issues. Like, you're a better analyst of the game by far than I am. And I'm just a casual viewer who could see the glaring issues that were involved in Kerry that management should have been more prepared for, that will ultimately take the blame for, I suppose, is probably the best way of putting it. So there is issues there. So one, do you feel sorry for Peter Keane not getting another run? And then two, is Jack the right man to go back to? Is nostalgia in a way, is going back to a guy from 10 years ago the way forward?
Yeah, see, Mick, this is why we don't need production meetings. There was two strands to this that I wanted to talk about, and you just hit both of them there. So, firstly, I do feel sorry for Peter Keane. I have to say, I think COVID was such a compromised year, even despite the criticisms that could justifiably be made over the Cork game. The one thing I would say, and I think this is such a fundamental starting point, right? And it just I cannot understand how more counties have not got this message. At the very least, you can say about Kerry is they have the business done early. Like, they have it done now in September. I think by all accounts, Jack O'Connor is going to have a presser next week. We'll hear his comments on it. That'll be put to bed. You look across the border, like Cork were knocked out well before Kerry. It's my understanding they haven't even finished interviews in Cork. You look at Meads, as we speak, there's news breaking that Andy McEnany's position, there's speculation around that. The county board executive had a vote last night. He didn't get full support. It was 8-7 against him. So now the decision will be put to the clubs. But why are Meads organising this in October? I do not understand why counties cannot put this stuff to bed earlier. You look at the amount of vacancies that are still to be filled. I just think that it is good practice to get this done early. We'll talk about Galway, the Hurling situation later on. Another situation that's been dragging on and on and on.
Yeah.
The message from the county board keeps saying, another week, we'll have this finished, another week. There's club games going on right now in the county. In some of these situations, you need drastic overhauls. For those to be drastic overhauls, you need to hold trials. For those new trials, you need to give club players some degree of security. They need to know, am I finished up my club championship? Do I have an opportunity to go for a trial? Can I go on holiday? Who am I trying to campaign to here? So none of that is boxed off. And for the life of me, at the very least, there's a lot of it that was, I would say, kind of unsettling. I would have to say about the situation, especially how Jack Connor went about it. I think, I don't think anybody came out of credit of that. But at the very least, it's put to bed by now. And I cannot understand how in other counties they're letting this drag on. We're talking here in the first week of October, and there's counties that still haven't a clue who's going to be over next year.
And look, this is just football alone, right? It's such a huge list of things. So it's Cork, as you mentioned, the biggest name of them all, right? And there's, Rick, and maybe, they're talking about it now, but as you said, we look like we're a way off getting an announcement there, at least, down another team, always full of potential, no manager, leash, it could, if Meath are throwing themselves into this position this late in the year, it's absolutely bananas. We'll see what unfolds from that. I don't understand how Meath, who are clearly making progress, decide that now's the time to do it. But anyway, Longford, Leitrim, Wicklow and Waterford, that's a huge amount of football teams this late in the year that have still no manager. And as you said, there's so many things that can go into these couple of months before the teams start getting back together. I don't know. It's absolutely crazy. But so Kerry is put to bed at the very least, but did they put it to bed in the right way?
Yeah, I don't know. I was listening back to, just ahead of this conversation we're having, I listened back to that Jack O'Connor, the famous Examiner podcast he did, where he basically talked about what his desire to go to the Kerry game. But I actually went back and listened to his analysis, his actual analysis of where Kerry are going wrong. Now, your hope would be maybe that in terms of, he is by all accounts, he hardens his teams, he trains them very well. I don't know if he has a huge amount of input tactically. Like, maybe that's why someone like Micheál Kirk, who by all accounts is very interested in that side of the game, Jimmy Murphy as well, apparently is also very interested in that side of the game. There's all these reports about Paddy Talley. Perhaps that's why that link is there. But when you listen, like, his analysis, some of it, to my mind, was way off. He spent a good portion of that podcast talking about James O'Donoghue and his role as a centre forward. I think, like, he was angling as maybe it was an alternative for Paulie Clifford. Like, Kerry have a lot of issues. Replacing Paulie Clifford is not one of them from this year. I can tell you that for a fact. So, I think the manner of James O'Donoghue leaving maybe more so is what he was trying to get at there. Like, there was stuff about, I think he was left out of an internal game and just before he decided to leave the panel. So maybe that was more so what he was trying to get at. But, James O'Donoghue is, what is he, 32, or is he 33 or 32 next year? So I'm not sure if that's something I'd put a huge amount of stock in. Spent a lot of time talking about sweepers, as we've talked about a lot on this podcast. Like, sweepers is not solution. Look at what Tyrone did this year. It's about having a modern version of a footballer, that kind of middle third where they can master these multifunctional roles. So that stuff wouldn't, to be honest, like, that wouldn't inspire me greatly. But I do think from a Kerry perspective, right? If we could compare this, maybe we're going to talk about Galway hurling in a second. Kerry are looking for a quick fix here. It doesn't matter. I don't really think the manner of it matters. I don't really think how it came about matters. The only priority for them is getting over the line and getting on Ireland. Whereas, to my mind, Galway are looking at, like, I think that needs to be a total structural overhaul. We'll talk about that in a second. So I think they're in very different places. So ultimately, like, I thought there was a lot of stock. I thought the other reporter ticket was very impressive, I thought. But it sounds like maybe today,
and lots
exactly. And Tony Buckley, obviously, who I think the players are very fond of. I think they looked for somebody in a similar role to be replaced this year and they didn't get it. That was definitely something that they were angling for. So there's scope that way in terms of, your suspicion might be that did they enter the race? Jack O'Connor had already declared his interest. He'd already left Kildare at that time. I'm sure he had a fair degree of security of what he was going about to do. So ultimately, I don't think any of that would matter a damn. All this is just window dressing. He'll be, if this is going to be a results business for him, it'll be next year. It could be as short term as get it done next year. To be honest, a 2-year term. I really think there's a lot of expectation on this team to deliver now.
So in his favour, he hasn't been out of the game. He was obviously an intercounty manager for the last 2 years. Before that, he was involved with Kerry Minors under 21s, won a lot, and was kind of almost seen. I remember sitting watching the 2014 All-Ireland final as Jack and his minor team were sitting there watching the senior final, and you're thinking to yourself, God, it's only a matter of time. Jack's not gone away. He's going to be back. That's only 5 years. That's only 3 years after he'd been gone at that stage from the senior team, you know what I mean? So it just seemed like he'd never really left Kerry football. I think that's important. I think the fact that he's worked with a lot of these guys, the young core of the team coming through, is important. But at the same time, like, I often think back and I think about the success. It's undoubted. I don't want to take all Ireland's off anybody. I don't want to take anything. But that team was phenomenal. It was magic. And what did he unlocked Donaghy? He unlocked Declan O'Sullivan. And you should be given credit for that. But they're also two generational players on a team where they were just two of 7 or 8 of those guys. I think that you feel like they would have come through anyway. So I don't want to dismiss his achievements, which were phenomenal, but they also were a long time ago, and they were within a team that was ripe for the picking. Some would argue this Kerry team might be in a similar vein. Like, you know, you've still got David Clifford has to go and win his All-Ireland. Sean O'Shea has to, you know what I mean? There's young guys all over the place.
Yeah, and there's absolutely no doubt that is a factor in when Jack O'Connor took you have to remember that minor team was successful before he took it under Peter Keane. He got a 20s job that a lot of people didn't think he was actually anticipated to get, and failed to deliver with that team. Like, let's be honest, like that team was from way out. That was one of the teams that actually had very, very close to a full arsenal at their disposal, and end up getting very well beaten by Kildare, really. So that, you know, and that actually like a lot of people envisaged that was going against his favor when he, by all accounts, wanted to carry job before Peter Keane got it. So, you know, that has to be borne in mind, that this is something he wanted from a long, long way out. I think you're 100% right, by the way. The relevance of what he did tactically, I've seen that drawn a lot, you know, about introducing like Steely players, you know, the likes of Aidan O'Mahony. And I mean, the relevance of what he did in 2006 has absolutely nothing to do with the game in 2021. There's very little that's comparable, really, in that regard. Now, I'm sure
if he thinks it is, it's a worry, because it's like what you're talking about again. And it's like Jack O'Connor knows more about football than I'd ever know if I studied it every day for 100 years. But what I'm saying is that if he's still talking about sweepers, and so when we've seen that the evolution of the game is the people who invented sweepers are now beyond it and are kind of like, it's almost like a fly sweeper, for want of a better word, you know, and it's like, but if you're still 5 years ago, those teams know how to beat it, and you're going to be constantly behind the curve because you're not innovating, you're copying, and so on and so forth, and you're actually copying from the past, really, not even from the present. So that would be a concern if there's a sort of a sense of, oh, all the things he did a decade ago are relevant to 2021. We know it's irrelevant, but if Jack O'Connor doesn't, that's an issue.
Exactly. And, you know, like, Mick, what your hope would be, like, you're so right on that point. And your hope would be that he recognizes that, you know, as simple as these things are, they need to be taken in a bit more of a complicated structure. And that would be a decision that would come around collectively, including, you know, the likes of Micheál Quirk, or maybe if it's Paddy Talley as well. So, like, for my example, right, like, I look at that Kerry team and I think, you know, the idea of introducing a bit of steel, I think, like, yes, but for different reasons. Tyke Molly, I think, was crucially underused this year. I think he's a really good man marking, cancelled out player. Not a huge amount of football on him, I think it's fair to say. But at the same time, he could have added into the full back. What I would have actually have done this year, I think, is Tyke Molly could easily go in cornerback. You could get Thomas Sullivan out of there. Thomas Sullivan, to my mind, could be the new Kerry 6. I think he won Club Player of the Year with Dingle as playing as a centre back. So he has a lot of in the club championship in Kerry when they won it. Was it 2 years ago or 2019 maybe? So he has experience in that role. From that role, he has the defensive mind. We've seen that time and time again, his ability to cancel out players, but he can also get forward. So I think that would be perfect for him. This kid who's actually over here this year, Stephen Kingar, I think that's a gift for Jack O'Connor. When I first reported this, I said it was a gift, and some people are coming back to me like, you know, it's a difficult transition for a lot of players to come back. And the reason I say that is because you have to look at what is it exactly you're getting, and what is the situation that they need, and what the Kerry need. Now, Kerry don't need too many more footballers. I'm not saying that Stefan is not a footballer. Like, he was a fabulous underage player for Kerry, especially in the 20s. But what he is above all else is a freak athlete. And when I say that, I mean this guy was in the top couple of percentile in the AFL. Like, he was a phenomenal athlete. And so regardless of a lot of players struggle with their football ability coming back, which I'm sure Stefan probably would have as well. But athletically, you're getting a player who is so far beyond what they had previously, which means that you can just, you know, that pace and power that they're kind of crying out for, coming off rebounding off the back, he can provide that. So I think there's a lot of scope for someone like that to come in and have a pretty big impact. You know, you look at how other players have struggled. A lot of the struggles are actually to do with physically the different games. I don't think that'll be necessarily the same case for someone like Stefan. You know, if you draw a comparison, a lot of people are crying out for Mark O'Connor, who's also long to come back for Kerry. I think Mark O'Connor would probably enjoy more of a transition, to be honest, than someone like Stefan O'Connor. Because, like, I'm not saying Mark O'Connor is not a good athlete, but he's not comparable to Stefan O'Connor. And also, Mark O'Connor will have to get his skill set up to pace, because that's what he was so good at. He was this like dynamic midfielder. A lot of people are drawing comparisons that, you know, could he be Kerry's answer to Brian Fenton? That stuff takes time to get back up. You know, your cat kick pass, all that stuff takes time. But you're getting with Stefan is just pure raw power, like a guy who really screwed on guy, a really intelligent guy. So in terms of tactically, I think he'd be very clued in. But just in terms of the athletic ability that you're getting with something like that, that's what I think Kerry could need. And you could, like, if you suddenly you introduce a half-back line, which is you're going to go Morley in an ideal sense, will still get there. You hold on to Foley. You can get Thomas Sullivan out the wing-back line, and then suddenly you've got Stefan Cabarta thrown to the mix there as well. You've got this whole idea of a steal in your full back line. It's there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe it's not, it's not what we compare to 2009, but I do think it would be a big improvement. And that's the thing, like, there, as much as we talk about this, there actually is scope for Kerry to improve as well, which, I guess is kind of why Jack is there.
There definitely is scope for them to improve, and if they do, they're very close to being there. That's exactly. I suppose is the point. Yeah. Yeah. And look, just to go back to my Peter Keane point, it's not that I was saying he's doing a bad job or anything like that. It's just that if your potential is to be the best and you're the second best, then you're not unleashing that potential, and I think then maybe you look around and say, well, is this going to happen next year, or have we got a better chance of someone else? And I think it was a fair question, at least from Kerry. I'm not sure you're too enamored with the appointment of Jack O'Connor, but look, time will tell. But interesting to kind of look at what he's bringing and what Kerry have there to unlock. But we've talked enough about Kerry. They weren't supposed to get the 20 minutes here at the start of the What about Kildare? Because I actually love what Kildare has done. Because
so do I.
Bloody infighting and nonsense and everything else. All you're expecting is, Kildare now they're gonna once again reject a legend of the game, and they're gonna bring in someone from the outside, and the county board hates us, and we hate the county board, and Kildare, and it's just this just kind of like constant sort of infighting and bickering, and it just seems like, do you know what, Ben Ryan? It's like Brian Lowen in Clare. It's just like, give the job to Glenn Ryan. He's somebody that should have had this a good while ago, to be honest.
Exactly, yeah. Like, there's a lot to be said for.
It's not like he's just off the streets either. Glenn Ryan wanted this job and is a coach and is has all the credentials, not just as the most legendary player that the county's ever had. Like,
exactly, and I think there's a lot to be said for the positivity that can come with appointing a local legend who also has a bit of coaching background. Like the buzz that was around Galway when Pádraig Joyce first got that appointment was something just I could not describe it to you. Like, it just literally invigorated the county. I think it was universally praised. This seems to be similar. And from Kildare's perspective, like, this is, I'm sure they would have been pretty frustrated as well with the way the Jack O'Connor stuff went down. But they're flying into, instead of, there was, and even, after the Jack O'Connor stuff, the aftermath of that, there was, I think, wrongly reported in places that the job was there for Tom Cribben if he wanted it, which I don't think would have, wouldn't have been the same inspiring without any being a slight on him. I just don't think it would have inspired the county in the same way. Instead, they had this huge positive step to jump off into 2022. Like, Mick, if the GAA wants to excel Motion B, if they want to get this over the line, all they have to do is draw up a map and show a picture of Glenn Ryan coming down to Fitzgerald Stadium against Jack O'Connor after everything they're going in and saying this will be a Championship League game. And can you imagine the absolute buzz of a game like that? Yeah. Like, Kildare hopping off the ground, Kerry looking for an All-Ireland. That's your sell right there, lads. That's the marketing ploy. But I think it's great. Like, I think from a Kildare perspective, there's, you look at Jack's record and getting them up to Division 1 was good, getting to a Leinster final was good, but they actually have a tangible reason to believe they can go on and better that now.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. This is a good team, and I still think like that. Like, they've got 5 or 6 really good players, and they've got a genuine superstar in Daniel Finn. Like, anybody who watched the game,
the hand pass himself,
he was the best player on the pitch that day against a team who'd won 6 All-Irelands in a row. I know they weren't having their best year, but there's plenty of talent in that Kildare team. Can we go back to Motion B for a minute? You've mentioned it a few times. It's not particularly, I don't want to go into it in the detail that we will closer to Congress, but just to explain to people who might be only kind of half paying attention, what is Motion B? And then I just want to pick up on one thing after about TV coverage when it does pass.
Yeah, like, it's kind of, the debate around this is driving me kind of insane, because I don't think the people advocating it against it have actually world. But I don't think they've read the motion. Like, some of the stuff they're saying I just don't think they've actually read the motion. Like, they're saying, like, why are we relegating our championship to a preseason competition? Like, that's not the championship anymore. The provincial championship, you will still provincial campaign, that is still there. That's going nowhere. all you're doing is flipping the season. I don't think enough people actually appreciate that you still have it there. It will still mean as much as any team entering it wanted to enter. It was brought up like at a Kerry, not to go back to Kerry, but it was brought up at that Kerry County Board meeting, that explosive County Board meeting. It was brought up by somebody that, one of the reasons that Kerry should be against this motion is because the outside the top 5 in Division 1 out here, right? If you don't finish top 5, you don't go through to the preliminary quarterfinals. The bottom 3 don't progress, so you pick. Firstly, it was brought up that Kerry won on Ireland in 2014, and they won on Ireland 2014, but finished 6th in the league, so they wouldn't have won that at Ireland if the system was in place. Which is it's totally out of context. I was in Tralee for a Kerry league game that year. They actually played Derry in Tralee, and I remember being in it, and there was this young kid, and he was shooting the lights out. I didn't know much about him. I was like, who was this guy? Anyway, it was Conor Cox. And Kerry never saw him again. They didn't treat that league in any way. You would treat the league entirely different if you know the cards on a stick. And to be honest, if you can't finish in top 5, you don't deserve to be in a preliminary quarterfinal anyway in this new structure, because that's what we're talking about here. This isn't the old league. This is not I don't know how I can stress that enough. This is not the old league. It's the 4 divisions. There still is scope for a Tailteann Cup. There still is scope for teams from Division 4 to get into a preliminary quarterfinal. So there's a carrot on the stick for everybody. There's flaws to it. There is definitely certain flaws to it. I don't like the some of the loopholes about it, potentially getting relegated, win Tailteann Cup, you're back in, and somebody else gets relegated. But I don't. So many of the counter arguments, like the idea that teams would deliberately get relegated if they don't finish in the top 5, is laughable. Is absolutely laughable. How long are we talking about the levels? I just think that what it means is that for the whole bulk of the championship, there is still scope to get 1 or 2 hammerings because of what would happen if a Division 4 team, for example, was drawn with a team who had a bounce in Division 1 in a preliminary quarterfinal, right? So, but that's one game, and it means that the vast majority of your championship are going to be competitive games, and that's what we're crying out for. We're crying out for teams to be playing at their level, and that's what, can you imagine if you got the Division 1 meaning as much as it will in this circumstance, and there are the games there. Now,
and played in nicer weather and later in the year and so on and so forth as well.
And we'll talk about, I'm sure we'll talk about, this can't just be a box ticking exercise. There needs to be more in terms of progressing the so-called weaker counties. And, it can't just, but for the purposes of this, you talk to the vast majority of players have come out for it. The vast majority of managers have come out in support of it. And I really hope that they deserve to be listened to, because the main voices of content against this are provincial leaders, we've seen a lot of them have come out, voice their opinion with it. Kerry was saying, at that county board meeting, it was raised by one delegate that this isn't in the best interest of Kerry. I think that's a very selfish way of going into a vote like this. This has to be what's in the best interest of Gaelic football. And I think of the 3 motions that we're looking at, this is absolutely the best motion for Gaelic football.
Can I also say about the weaker counties not being progressive? We need a plan, and we always need a plan, and it should be the focus of the association constantly. But even if it's not, Division 4 teams get no coverage during the league, but they get more coverage in a real way than they do in the championship. You know what I mean? So if you have this there, and it's like if Carlow have a shock win over Wexford or something like that, I don't know if that would be a shock. That might be unfair. But say Carlow beat a team like that, they're going to get some coverage. They're going to get some positive coverage and some conversation. Whereas the only conversation we ever have about these teams in the championship, they'll play each other in the Leinster preliminary round and nobody will bat an eyelid, even less than they do in the league. And then they'll go and lose by 40 points to Dublin, and we'll say, we can't keep going on like this. We need to do something. How are they supposed to grow football in Carlow? And that's the conversation we have about Carlow every year. And I don't mean to be unfair to Carlow. It could be Longford. It could be anyone. Leitrim was the team that we picked last year as the ones that we were going to feel sorry for. When have we ever talked about a Leitrim game that was interesting and competitive? The London game a couple of years ago, or the New York game that they nearly lost a few years ago when they were the favourites, was the most conversation I ever remember Leitrim ever getting. You know what I mean? So it's whereas they play in the league, we do talk about them. Maybe not everybody, maybe it's not always on the Sunday game, but they're getting coverage, and people understand the competition that they're in and what they're trying to achieve.
It's such a good point. And people will say, at the height of the summer, will these teams really get the coverage? And as you say, they're getting that coverage while Division 1 and 2 are actually going on as well. There's a proven template that they will get that attention at the time. I do think these conversations are happening a lot, where 2 people come together and they both agree on everything in the motion. And so just a couple of the counter arguments, right?
As well, yeah. Go on. You give me yours, and I'll give you mine.
So a couple of the counter arguments against this that have been introduced, and that I think we can fairly easily squash. One is the idea that if you finish outside the top 5, like let's be honest, there's a card on the stick there. You don't treat this like you would a normal league. The idea that's been put forward a lot about the history of the Provincial Champions being weakened, they'll be what they are, what you make of them. Like I don't, think about the reason the league was entertaining is because we got competitive games as much as that. So if they get competitive, like the Ulster Championship, if it's still competitive, will still be the reason. How many times have we raved about Division 1? Or actually, I think our favorite division for a long time has been Division 2 for the last couple of years because of how competitive that is, and there's so many things that could go up or down. So if Ulster Championship, as they love to claim, is as competitive and entertaining as they claim it to be, it could still have the same prestige as an interest as those always have done. It's about the parameters winning that, but we wouldn't have to put as much stock in what's happening elsewhere because we're seeing blowouts. Whereas when we finally get into summer, we're seeing teams that did at a competitive level. So it's not becoming, the comparisons. I think it's really disingenuous to say, "Oh, we're relegating the Ulster Championship to the McKenna Cup." That's not what this is at all. Like I think it's disingenuous
to
say
anyway,
that.
but possibly in Munster and Connacht. But you know what? Maybe that needs to happen there because they're not even realistic competitions. And if Cork and Kerry meet in the final and Cork are a decent team one year, then that's a great way to jump into your championship, is to have what will be essentially a league final. People take league finals seriously. So whatever, it'll actually even be more because of its historic connection. But I do think it will lose something. But you know what? That's okay. We have to let go of them. Munster Championship dead, Connacht Championship dead, and unfortunately as well, the Leinster Championship is dead. Outside of these teams playing each other, which they still will be, but they're not playing any silverware as such because Dublin are just sauntering through it every year, and you're just hoping to avoid them in the draw. So whatever, Ulster will take it. I've watched McKenna Cup where I thought that everything was on the line, so I wouldn't worry about the championship.
Yeah, so I think it's a big part of it. Another thing as well, like people talk about like the financial implications of what it means for the provincial counties. Are you give me a break? Like, are you telling me that these competitive and I'm reluctant to call them league because people attach the old league versions of it, but these competitive leagues that'll be in the summer aren't going to be like sellouts, and the competitive advantage, like even just from the increase of games, like that does not wash for me. Like I've been at league games that nearly sold out. Like the league final, Kerry played Mayo, there was a massive crowd in at that a couple of years ago. Dublin versus Kerry, the league final, was it 3 years ago when Stephen Crooks came out sold out over the halfway line? Again, huge crowds at that. And so you can imagine what those games would do in a league structure in the summer. So that does just not wash for me at all. So I think
one other.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, do you want to go ahead?
No, I was just going to say, I think a lot of the problems that are coming out of the counter arguments for this are the fact that people haven't engaged with the motion enough. And I do think that the GA could do more to sell the motion. As we talk now, the GPA are holding a press conference on that, which I think is great. Like, I really do think that drumming up as much interest as possible and getting players, particularly to lobby their county delegates, is important. But I do think a lot of it is coming from people. It's either disingenuous or it's people not doing enough research, to my mind.
Yeah, I've got a big issue though. There's an awful lot of TV games going to come. One of your issues last year is that we couldn't, or there's an awful lot of games. Sorry, I was going to mention TV. There's an awful lot of games going to be in this championship. You mentioned last year that we couldn't enjoy the summer. We didn't have you couldn't just say, right, we've got the Munster Hurling final, the Ulster football final. This is our weekend. We're going to look forward to them. We're going to bathe in them, and then come Tuesday we're going to get into the Leinster final and the Connacht football final or whatever, and that's it. This isn't going to have a chance to happen. It's not going to happen. We also have a TV deal that when the Super 8s came on board and the hurling round robins came on board, it didn't increase. It didn't increase, and it couldn't handle the capacity that was now there for interesting, big, and get games that really needed to be on television, Now, what's going to happen here, because you're going to have all these games, you can't say, oh, geez, we can't show Galway versus Mayo, because, we can't not show that. But at the same time, that's the fourth game this week that we need to show, because do we need a new TV deal? For me, actually, a TV deal that has hurling, and here's the amount of hurling games you're allowed to show, and that's separate, and a football TV deal with a certain amount of games. I think that would be a good idea, and it would stop all the arguing that goes on. I don't know. Even if RT buy them both, I'm not suggesting they split up or one goes on Sky or anything like that. But I don't know, because you're going to have the round robin back next year, or whenever this comes in, and you're going to have 60, 70 games in this competition. And where does it all go?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I really hope that's what I was kind of getting at there, is that I think it's a fabulous moment we're on the edge on, but it is only fabulous if we capitalize on it. And part of capitalizing on it is drumming home the fact that we're going to, I actually think as I said before, I think GA should be doing more presentation on this to sell this motion if it is actually what they want. In previous circumstances, the reason that these got a bit more promotion, you talked about Super 8s, that was Duffy's baby. That's what he wanted, so that's why he got promoted as heavily as it did. That's just so I think this doesn't really necessarily have that kind of authorship, and that might, as a consequence, make it suffer. But however, there's a proven framework, Mick. There's a proven framework for what we can do in the circumstances, and the framework is Club GA. Like you watch Club GA, Mayo GA TV is an example that strikes to my mind this year. I was just going over the accounts for an article that I'm hoping to do in a couple of weeks, and Mayo Club GA took in 80,000 from their Club GA last year. Now their offerings are incredible. Like in terms of their camera work, I think Galway have actually outsourced it to stop the poor stream one thing in the stand, that they got BO Sport involved, and which again, all power to them. You watch what TG Carr have done. You watch the innovation, how innovative certain counties have been. I just saw last weekend, I saw Westmeath GA. Like, isn't this just a brilliant idea, Mick? Westmeath GA have an hour-long YouTube show, 3 local, a former Camogie manager and 2 local journalists sitting down talking about the club games weekend, and they have the clips from all the games. It's like a Westmeath GA highlights package. They're sitting at a full produced show. Having on YouTube. The thing is over 1,000 views. Down for people. This is a proven framework that in a digital age to come and engage that. And so as you mentioned, I hope that is. To be honest, I think that type of stuff should be addressed before we even have a vote. Like, what does this mean from what are the TV implications of something like this? I think it's important. That's definitely important. But I do hope that given success we've seen elsewhere, I hope that there is kind of a framework to that. Even like I have become obsessed with TG Carr of a highlights show for the club games. So I watched like Monday night, Tuesday morning our time, Monday night your time. I watched highlights from like the Limerick Club Championship, Limerick Club Hurling, like an absolute thriller, like Liberties, a shootout in that game. I watched Road, like Niall McNamee, reeling in the ears, highlights from that game. There was games from Galway on it as well. A really well done midweek highlights show, which we're going over old ground here, but it's something that I've campaigned for previously. But I hope that all of that stuff comes, if we don't get an answer for that before, definitely after.
Okay. Look, we'll talk more about this. When are we when is Congress?
Is it the 23rd? So 23rd of October. So
October,
there's still loads of time to drum up.
Yeah.
Maybe for I could have overshot the gun here, by the way. Like, maybe for all I know, there's campaigns in the framework, and it's going to go heavy in the next couple of weeks. And
can I give you my prediction?
Go ahead. Yeah.
My prediction is that everything is rejected and we stay the same.
I
think 2 of them could even get a majority vote, but to get the 2/3 won't, and we'll just say, "Oh God, I can't believe Congress works this way. Nobody wants this." But look where we are. We've got the worst option of all, which is staying the same, but we don't have to vote for that. So,
and the one thing I would stress to people, I don't know if this is well known. If we turn this down, our only alternative is that immediately Congress are going to be asked to vote. Do you want to go back to the Super 8s or the old qualifier system? And that's the way it is. So there's no the scope. This idea that this isn't the right motion, or whatever. If this comes up, we're either going back to Super 8s or we're going back to the old qualifier system. There's no in between. That's what we're going to have next year.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the hurling. The PwC All-Stars nominees were out this morning. Still don't know if we're going to have a banquet this year. It's probably unlikely at this stage, unfortunately. But look, we'll talk about hurlers of the year, young hurler of the year. Any absentees that you're furious about?
Not really. No, I kind of think, what do you reckon? Like, have they hit on something here in terms of if maybe it's just because Limerick were as dominant as they were? I kind of like the idea of the winners getting 3 nominations in a situation like this. Like, would you have any grievance if we have no information or anything, but would you have any grievance if the footballer nominations come out next week and you learn that it's Conor Myler, Kerry McGeary and Darren McCurry are nominated for best footballer of the year? Like,
no, I wouldn't, and I think I'd also think that there's probably a couple of Mayo guys that over the course of the year should certainly be in the conversation, right? But I don't think that's the case in hurling. I think it's very clear it should only be the 3 because, and look, I don't like the idea of, it was a close final, it was 2 good years, let's make sure we have 2 Limerick guys and 1 Cork guy, or whatever might have been the case this year if it was a closer All-Ireland. It shouldn't be formulaic like that. But in this case, the next people I would have had in, or if I was to swap anybody, would have been, well, William O'Donoghue, I think, is very unlucky not to be one of the three, but it's other
David
Limerick.
Burns, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, it's other Limerick guys. So sorry, just to tell people in case they haven't seen it, the hurlers of the year nominations are Cian Lynch, Kyle Hayes, and Sean Finn. And the young hurler of the year, by the way, Aidan McCarthy from Clare, Shane Barrett from Waterford, Non County from Kilkenny. So the three got the other counties get a look in on the young hurler of the year. But just thinking about, like, Cian Lynch, I think, is going to win it, and I think he was good all the way out through the year and got better as it went on. For me, Kyle Hayes started the year off like a house on fire. Was still fantastic all the way through. You're still talking about like high level, but his shine out games didn't happen later on in the year. And Sean Finn, look, we talked about Sean Finn early in the year, best cornerback in the country. He wasn't in our rolling all-stars team for weeks and weeks and weeks because he hadn't had that one standout performance. There was no doubt in our mind that Sean Finn was eventually going to get into that team and that he would ultimately win a real all-star, which isn't done by the week the way we do. So there's no doubt that he was brilliant. But I wonder, before semi-final and final, was Sean Finn one of the best three hurlers in the country? You know, this particular year. I like seeing a cornerback on this list, so I'm not going to argue about it too much. But for me, O'Donoghue, you know, I think Seamus Flanagan probably didn't have a good enough final to make it, but he would have been close to it as well. And I'm probably forgetting one or two. I have to say, I think Nicky Quaid is somebody that could be looking at a list like this at some point as well.
Yeah. I just think that, you know, I think, say, for example, you mentioned footballer a second ago, right? I think Lee Keegan is probably deserving of a nomination for footballer of the year. But I don't think Lee Keegan deserves to win it above, let's say he is nominated, and let's say Mick and Moyler nominated as well. But what we've seen in the past is that can tend to split the vote. Like, I remember when there was a lot of people were in uproar over Joe Canning and Cian Lynch won it. Who was the other player that was nominated? Oh, Mannion. So the three boys were nominated. I think a lot of people had thought Mannion might get it. Then there was a bit of a groundswell for Joe, and out of nowhere, Lynch gets it. Not like, to be honest, at the time I had no issue with that at all. Like, I thought Cian Lynch was a fabulous hurler, so whatever. But you know, the
but it happened in the year Andy Moran won, the year Lee Keegan did win it himself. You know, like there was an argument that they were fair, and also look, if we are talking about the football, Mayo have more footballers of the year than most teams. Have a lot more All-Irelands than them. I think did Higgins, did he win? No, he won young footballer. But you had Keegan, you had Moran, and you had one more that I'm not thinking of. But they definitely had three, I think, over the past however many years.
Yeah, John Fogarty wrote a great column. The Irish Examiner columnist wrote a great column this week about the 10 things you didn't know about the All-Star Selection Committee. So one of them anyway was that they are, as maybe me and you might have known this, they are very parochial. So the Dublin-based journalists would be absolutely adamant that they should be it. But the fact is that Dublin-based journalists are outweighed by a lot of other counties-based journalists. Wouldn't necessarily agree on that. Also, he mentioned something that I don't know is as widely known. Since the GPA and GBA voted to amalgamate, the players vote for Player of the Year. The nominees themselves are picked by journalists, but
that's
then
very important. Though they don't vote for who the nominees are; they vote on the three, and then that's a GPA players vote then for that. So that's why you might split the vote or whatever. But look, I think that the hurlers are probably fair there. Actually, again, I would certainly have William O'Donoghue instead of either Finn or Hayes. I'm not sure, but I would also pick Cian Lynch as the winner of the award. So I'm not really too perplexed by it, and I absolutely agree there should be three Limerick. I think they were dominant. I'd have them, I think I did a team with them having 12 All-Stars. That's just me personally. I think our rolling All-Stars had 11, and I'm not sure where you would feel, but I can't see too many being left out anyway. Look, I think when a team is so much better than everybody else, like, I mean, absolutely, like, is Tony Kelly going to win an All-Star this year? He probably will. And does he deserve it? Yes, in one way, but in another way, it's like the team who was winning all the matches had more games for a reason, you know? And they are like was Tom Morrissey better than Tony Kelly this year in the games that they played? Probably not. But over the course of the year, did he have more impact on the hurling season? I would say yes, you know, because Clare were out in the last 12, like.
And like I can imagine there's Dublin people screaming at their phones here that, you know, they never got disrespect for when they were.
That wasn't my fault, because I would have said there was there's two teams ever that I would have said the Dublin team in 2018, I think, was it 2018 or 2018, and the Kilkenny team in 2008, I advocated at least briefly for 15 All-Stars.
I remember that. Yeah. The year they destroyed Tyrone. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah. So look, I mean, there's the scope for all this. I do think there is that you should, the way this is weighted, I would weight it differently to a lot of people. I personally think you should put more stock in performances when things are going against the grain, and when that's why
absolutely,
like for example, I go back to, well, like, look, we're going over our ground here, but like what Tony Kelly did against Cork this year, when the game started to go away from me, that wonder score he hit. Like, and now in fairness, a lot of people turn around and say he didn't score the goal at the end. So, and maybe something like that. But I do think you
as well, like single-handedly,
Yeah. So I think you have to invest more in the.
Why did he score the goal, Maurice? Could have been so different. Can you imagine? No, seriously, this is what I want to talk about, the narrative of that. I don't want to get into Tony Kelly chat, right? Sorry, but if Tony Kelly had scored, wonder score from the sideline, whatever, and game over, right? And he goes in full forward, picks a ball out of the sky with 3 Cork defenders around him, wrestled to the ground, penalty, nails the penalty, time's up 10 seconds later, he wins the ball like he did, bursts through and gets free out of the tackles and gets a free shot off, right? That's what Tony Kelly did do. So far, that's a miracle. If he puts that ball into the net, which is not the easiest thing he has to do in that sequence, but it's one of the more, it's the one part of it that you'd expect him to do of it all. And he does that. And Clare win that match by a point because Tony Kelly scored 2 goals in the last 30 seconds and won the penalty. That's one of the greatest stories in the history of the game.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And instead, he almost did it. So it's forgotten about. The plaudits are shared with the Cork goalkeeper, and we move on, and Cork are through to the next round.
But yeah, you're so right. I was thinking about this the other day. Do you remember that clip I sent? I put up on Twitter of the 2008 Kerry and Tyrone game, and there's a moment in that clip, right? If you watch it from the very start, the ball is kicked out. Declan Sullivan standing on the 45. He works all his way back, is one-on-one with Sean Kavanagh, dives at his boot. It's an incredible block. Not only does he stop Sean Kavanagh, block the ball, he gets the ball, wins it back. The ball goes up the end, score. Gooch gives a gorgeous pass into Tommy Walsh. But Tommy Walsh scores that goal. It's one of the best goals we've ever seen in Croke Park, like as an entire play. But instead, it's saved. It goes up, and now that the only reason people remember any of that is because, did that happen before Brian Dooher scored that wonder score and Kerry threw away another All-Ireland? But
Kerry didn't win. Yeah. All right. Okay. Young Hurlers of the Year, McCarthy. For me, McCarthy and Shane Barrett. I think I'm surprised he's still eligible for this, but there you go. Eoin Kelly, I thought faded as the year went on, but was remarkable.
Yeah, he was. I think he's getting that because of the Galway game. I think that it was just one. My opinion on that is that it's one standout. I don't know what you think about this though, like about young players. Do you think like say for example, we talk about the dominant players who are going to be nominated for Young Player of the Year in football. Like, would you be surprised if a single one of them gets an All-Star?
No, I don't think any of the 3 of them are going to get an All-Star, and I think that this award is becoming a little bit more like a kind of future stars award.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Then I think there's probably lads in the age category who have a better chance of winning an All-Star. Strangely, although I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't looked at it in that way, but I would just think that surely there's somebody in the Hurler of the Year who's probably going to win an All-Star.
Yeah, I think I think there's probably putting stock in that because the one that stands out in my mind is Adrian Mullen won it that year. But I'm like, oftentimes I think the nominees are nowhere near an All-Star, whereas in Gaelic football the nominees are in some cases probably close to Player of the Year. You think about like Dave Clifford and Sean O'Shea in the last 2 years are 2 good examples of that. But I just think it's interesting that for whatever reason maybe it is something to do with the game or something that it just takes that a couple of years more, I guess. Hurling's an old man's game, apparently.
All of a sudden, yeah. Well, Tony Kelly won Hurler of the Year and Young Hurler of the Year and an All-Star when he was 19. So he's a good player, though. Don't know if you've ever heard of him. We just talked about him there 2 minutes ago. Come here, let's talk about the look, we'll find out more about the All-Stars. We'll talk about the football ones when they're coming in as well. But there's some hurling managerial merry-go-rounding as well. Look, I said I was down in Clare. We're at the weekend. We're very much on the border, and with Tipperary, and I talked to a good few Tip people about Colin Bonner, and I don't know. I feel everybody has the same thing where I think they initially were surprised. There's an initial kind of sense of, oh, was that the best person for that job, or was there not somebody else kind of going in for it after Liam Cattle, so on and so forth? And then it's like, do you know what though? He did a very good job in Carlo, and do you know what? Everyone who worked with him at this club says he's amazing. And you told me, I'm sure you're going to say now about people lying down for him, or that people would die for him. I heard the same thing about 4 or 5 times, but it's an eventual thought. Do you see what I mean? People are uninspired by it and then talk themselves into it. And I just wonder, is the instinct right or is the analysis right? Because hopefully from Tipperary's point of view, it's the analysis that's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as you mentioned there, yeah, like a friend of mine, Leo Curtin, a good Tipperary man I lived with him in Sydney, and like he is willing to go to war for Cullen Bonner. Like he is genuinely ready. Played for him in Fitzgibbon Hurling. I think everything Cullen Bonner has done since this appointment suggests to me that it was probably the right decision. This is probably stuff that was stressed in the selection committee. This goes back to my mind, is the importance of a selection committee and what exactly is their priority. And he talked about something as simple as cultivating a backroom team that is every one division of the county covered. I think it's like in some ways you might say that's simple. You want to have as wide a brief as possible, and this is a team on cultivation. Maybe they do need to unearth some new talent, but a lot of people don't do that. You look at the makeup of some other backroom teams. A lot of them will look externally, or they will look a lot from their own club. Whereas I think something like that is very encouraging. I thought how bullish he was in his initial interview about the idea that this isn't, this is maybe a year to throw away next year, for example, that he, was fairly adamant that if they can get the right mix together pretty quickly, that they can do something quick. Look, you might say, what else is he going to say? But I do think a lot of other managers would play that safe and say, I fully appreciate that we have a rebuilding job here to do. That is absolutely not the noises coming out of here. I remember, when we spoke to Richard Cody a couple of years ago at Carlow, he raved again about Bonner. There definitely does seem to that vibe that he is a player's manager. I actually think that's something that Tipperary need, and like Sheedy was similar, don't get me wrong. I think he was absolutely a player's manager, but I think that's something that they need. I think it's the right appointment at the right time, which is something that a lot of counties need to bear in mind as they look to future selections right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got other things there. Dara Egan has moved to Wexford. He was also in line, obviously, for that job. It's another outside manager for Wexford. See how that goes. Stephen Malumphey to go into Kerry is an interesting one. Waterford man there, of course, Army guy. I'd imagine he'll be well drilled. That's pathetic. But I imagine he'll bring a lot of organisation and stuff like that. And Kerry always, you never know with Kerry. They're always one kind of savant manager away from making a huge impact one year and then disappearing the next. But the big gaping hole in the manager situation is Galway. No Davy for sure. Anyway, I think you'll be glad about that. I think they're about a week away from just giving Cyril another go, are they?
Yeah, I don't know, Mick. It's weird. Like, so initially, I think I was talking to you. There was like rumors linking Dave to it. By all accounts, the word out of Galway was that there's absolutely no truth to that. Suddenly now this week, there's a lot of talk that maybe he is interested if Micheál Donoghue isn't interested. So, it looked like it was coming down between Brian Hanley, who's the minor manager, and Linsky, who's the under 20 manager. Like to go back to the very start with all this, like to my mind, this is what I was getting at earlier with the Kerry situation, and you compare it to the Galway situation, and like I think Galway needs, if we're being honest, as a county, a total restructure. Really, there's too many mysteries that are continuing to go unresolved. That as a collective, as a county, that need to be resolved. So, Michael Foley was writing about this last Sunday. Like, amidst all the controversy about the Supermax controversy was the fact that they had revealed over the 4 years they'd given 2 million to the Galway hurling team. Now, when you compare that commercially, like 2 million to what Tenio gave to Tipperary, what JP McManus is given to Limerick, what Cork are getting on Sports Direct, like they're not maximising their commercial benefit at all. And I actually know for a fact that one thing Micheál Donoghue was very big on was fundraising by himself. I mean, he literally went and fundraised for this team and raised a lot of money, it has to be said, for Galway hurling. He was behind the development now. Lucas, who the famous strength conditioning coach, initially was plied away from Galway. He's now back. It was actually Micheál Donoghue's proposal that he would oversee the entire county. So you have a structure where a guy, if he's entering Galway hurling at 15, he is streamlined all up until the seniors. So that's currently in place right now. I think Galway is in drastic need of long-term vision, and the reason that I don't think whatever about externally, I don't think Dave Fitzgerald has that long-term vision right now. I think it would be a short-term fix, and I don't think that's what Galway needs. I would kind of compare this to I was writing about this. The Limerick football, for example, is something that I've thought a lot about recently. Like, I don't know if this is widely known. Billy Lee, the current Limerick manager, Billy Lee was actually on the selection committee that went looking to appoint a new manager in 2016. So he was on this 5-man panel. John Broder stood down. Billy Lee was on it, and it was his subcommittee very quickly realised, what is it we're looking for? We're looking for somebody who's ultra passionate, knows Limerick, knows the lay of the land, knows where the rugby strongholds, where the soccer strongholds, can cut his cloth to what is there. He knows the resources that are at his disposal. He knows what needs to happen in terms of the grassroots structure with somebody like Paul Connacht. He's ultra passionate about Limerick football, about rebuilding Limerick football, about creating a structure. So this operating in tandem, senior team, underage structures, the whole thing, an ultra comprehensive idea. And they kind of realized, this is the guy we need. So second meeting, he goes in, he's offered the job by his fellow subcommittee members. They'd actually approached somebody else in the meantime. Billy Lee goes and he creates an entire Limerick backroom team. So, in his entire reign, like, this is kind of remarkable, really, when you think about it. In Limerick football's entire reign, their goalkeeping coach, their selector, their strength and conditioning coach, their every single backroom member of staff is Limerick. They're 100% native. Now, why is that important? Because what I'm getting at is that Limerick needed to rebuild for long-term vision. So their short-term benefits are obvious. Like, they were with the post away from Munster final last year, Division 4 title last year, Division 3, they semi-final this year, came the closest of anybody, I'd say, to Derry. Like, they lost by 3 points. As we turned out that the summer, that was a pretty good Derry team. So that's the short-term vision. But long-term, they have the academy up in place. And I think Galway need a similar thing like that to happen. And I think the man to do that is somebody who has that at their heart. It's somebody like Micheál Donoghue who is invested in the club game. Like Brian Hanley is also, actually, but Hanley and Linsky are both currently coaching in the club game as well. So the scope there. I think when O'Donoghue initially stood down, Ford and Larkin were both approached to take it, who were selectors under him. Now, that was obviously never going to happen. But what I'm getting at is, I think it needs to be that kind of selection is what Galway need. They need somebody who is fully invested in the long-term vision for Galway hurling. And that's, like, as much as people are willing to criticize Davy, his record speaks for itself. I just don't think that's what Galway need right now. It's not about Davy, it's about any external manager. I think it needs to be somebody who's passionate about cultivating something long-term for the benefit of Galway hurling.
Yeah, they're also a county that won the All-Ireland like 4 years ago. I don't know if like the outside manager to come in and change the culture is what they need. Whereas I think you're right. I think there's an element of maybe that's what counties needed in the past when they brought in outside managers, was someone to change the culture, make them believe, show them that, like, this is how we do it in Kerry, you should do that here too, whatever. But and that's fine. That worked, and that's a very serious thing. But I wonder if now it is more along the lines of, if you have a county board that has all its structures in place and everything is going well and everything is there, maybe that guy could come in and be the cherry on top. But now, if you're looking to fundraise, if you're looking to kind of recruit, if you're looking to scour the club game for new talent, if you're looking to do all these things that a manager of a senior county team shouldn't really have to do, but does in Galway, in some of these places that maybe don't have their ducks in a row, you need to do that from within, and that person needs to muck in and not just kind of come from the outside and say, here, I'm going to deal with these 30 guys and this is how we're going to change things.
Like, yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. That's exactly what I mean. Like, for the benefit of Galway hurling, like, there has to be somebody, the next manager has to be come in and he has to entrust younger players. Like, maybe that means next year, like, there might be a bit of damage there. Like, I might be a bit of heartache, but entrust them that I'm not coming in here and looking for a quick fix in 2 years and I'm out of here again. Like, I'm going to give you a full opportunity to earn your jersey here, to get in. I'm going to have open trials. I'm going to integrate, Park Joyce went into Galway. One of the very first things he did was, not only did he include a couple of the under-20s within the panel, he introduced this segmentary, it's basically like a second panel. And all he's trying to do is streamline so that there's a ready pool of players to pick from, not for this year or for next year, but for 5 years down the line. That suddenly the pool of players in Galway that are in this elite environment increases. That is only to the betterment of Galway football. We might not see the evidence of that. Park Joyce might never ever see the evidence of that, but Galway football will see the evidence of that. And that's what I think, like, I would be a lot kind of more critical than some people about Galway's inability to kick on from their underage success. Like, I think it points to, integral structural failures, really, if we're being brutally honest about it. Mm-hmm. Like, there's players that come in and are given very little notice. They're pulled from the panel. Some of the standards that applied are absolutely baffling. A guy comes in, has one bad half last year, and he's cut from the panel entirely. Other players are given, like, much longer leashes. A lot of it doesn't really make a huge amount of sense. But I do think from a Galway perspective, they need somebody who is invested in that to come in next. And but I don't know, is Davy or anybody else for that matter from outside of Galway the answer to that?
It feels like this conversation is at the Irish football team, and like Micheál Donoghue is Stephen Kenny, who has to go and sort of build Irish football up and worry about a lot more than just the 11 players on the field. But like Davy Fitzgerald is for all the people who want better results, and he's Sam Allardyce in this conversation, which I don't think Davy would be too happy about. But it's a fair comparison, isn't it? Look, we're out of time. We've got an hour here, which we weren't even meant to do. And because, look, it's great to be talking about GAA. I'll give you one more subject you can talk about. You can talk about Ballygunner's 8 in a row. You can talk about the Antrim final this weekend. Or you can talk about Eoin Kelly and Mossy Quinn and all the legends that are still lighting up the club championship every year, about 10 years after we all thought they retired.
Yeah, I'll tell. There's only one place I'm going here. I'll tell you what happened. So Tuesday morning, I'm sitting down and watching the highlights on TGR here. As I mentioned there, the South Liberties game. So this is Limerick, absolute thriller. Box goes to extra time, quarter final. But I listened to a podcast at the same time, had the highlights out in front of me, and eventually I was like, "Geez, I recognize that goalkeeper from somewhere." So like just whatever it was, his gaunt or whatever he was doing. So turn off the volume. Anyway, it was Anthony Nash. It's just like mad. Like from a second, I felt like my brain wasn't computing it. I was like, "What is like? I don't understand this." It very quickly dawned on me that obviously he's got retired. There was something he was looking at doing. But anyway, this is a long way I'm going about.
You just broke up on me there. That since he's retired, do what?
He mentioned when he retired that this was something he was interested in. He's got family ties in Limerick. He's based there as a teacher, and this was something. But for whatever reason, I found it. I couldn't comprehend that why this, a man who embodied Cork for so long, in my mind, was suddenly play in the heart of this Limerick Championship tie. But anyway, it was very cool to see kind of whatever you want to call it, like a modern legend operating in that. And then suddenly the next game comes on and you're watching Niall McNamee, and it was, and I'm sure people have seen the highlights already of what he's doing. And this comes a week after Mossy Quinn is going 1-4 for Vincent's. In like Mossy Quinn, a lot of these players, I think they inevitably end up gravitating back towards the goal because it's so much harder to play in a position like that when you have pace. Like this is a guy who played in the inside forward line and it's going 1-4. It's kind of it's frightening, Eoin Kelly again. And this is
Mossy Quinn. There's a point going around that Mossy scored, and look, I love Mossy and I know him and he's a great guy. He scored a point for Vincent's on the turn from about 45 yards, a high kick that he never would have scored at his prime from play. That's
an interesting. I don't. This is a separate conversation. We can get into this again. It's an interesting point, though. I watched Anna Down played Clare Galway in the club championship. This was another game that was on TGR highlights. I actually watched this game live though in Tuam Stadium last weekend. And Damien Comer. Now, like Damien Comer is a brilliant footballer. We all know that. But Damien Comer hit two screamers, a free just before half time. It was kind of in front of the goals, but it was a good distance out. But he kicked it on his left foot, sunk it over the bar. They're a point down, and they need to draw this game. So if they draw this game, they can progress. Clare Galway need to win. So there's 4 minutes left. The weather in Tuam, as it tends to be, is terrible. Like Pearse Stadium and Tuam, whatever it is about those two grounds, they just seem to be, in the seventh circle of Dante's Inferno. Like the weather is just always miserable. And he kicks a free from out near the sideline, a point down, a point that came up to score on his left foot, absolutely sinks it. And you're looking Galway had an issue with their free taker this year. I don't know if you remember, they played Mayo in the Connacht final, and just after half time they're 6 points up, and Enda Tierney goes over to take the free on his left foot and misses it, and they didn't score again for another 20 minutes. It ended up being fairly crucial. It's been going over a lot. And I remember thinking, I was watching the weekend, I was like, would anybody have asked Damien Comer in Crow Park on his left foot to take that free? And the answer is probably no. And I kind of think maybe that's the right decision, because there is just that small bit less pressure, and he knows he is so much better than the players on the pitch in Tuam, for example, that it gives you that just small more degree of confidence to go and do what he did, like to kick a screamer as he did on his left foot. And if anybody watched this game, Damien Comer was doing everything. Damien, he kicked that free before half time over the bar. the second half starts, he's up competing the throw-in, wins the throw-in, and drives up on the field as well. Like, he's playing in 4 different positions at once. But that's not something, he doesn't have the scope. It would be unfair to ask him to do that for Galway, because, you know, it's to develop a one-man team. Is there. But it got me thinking, you know, you see players do things, outrageous players, fantastic players do things at club level that they would not do, in a good and a bad way, that they would not do at senior level. And I think that's kind of okay. It's kind of why the club game is as good as it is.
It's almost a separate conversation watching lads in their prime. I remember, like, you know, Smith O'Brien's, my club down in Clare, they beat Tubber this year, last weekend in the major championship. Tubber have beaten them a good bit in the last few years, and Pat O'Connor is you know, the Clare captain, who's out injured at the moment. He's their kind of star player. He's their county player, and he was centre back in a couple of those games. And I remember being at them just going like, Jesus Christ, this guy is so good. And never, you know, you'd always think, oh yeah, Clare would miss him today, but you wouldn't think much about what he could do as a hurler. You know what I mean? And just seeing these lads up close. And I think I remember watching the Galway County final years ago with Kildare, and Pádraig Joyce was still in his prime, maybe just slightly past his prime, but for club level. And just playing genuine quarterback, like just doing whatever he wanted, you know what I mean? Holding up the game, you know, just doing that effortless Pádraig Joyce solo. And it was one of the best things. I just remember thinking, how good is Pádraig Joyce? He's always been one of my favorite players, but so on and so forth. So there is the watching the club guy in their prime. Brendan Maher for
example,
League. You know, who we should watch out for again this year. They absolutely hammered Nina in the Tipperary Championship there last week, and will have a say again. But he was doing things he'd never do for Tip, because there was always somebody else to do that job, you know, up front or whatever. But that's one thing. But then there's also the guys who are like, do you know what? They don't have the legs or the fitness or the commitment. Sometimes it is only commitment, even at the older ages, to play county anymore. But you know what? They're still the class of that pitch, even with other county lads there, when they play for Vincent's, when they play for Mullinahone. Eoin Kelly scored 12 points, I think, in the championship. Like Eoin Kelly, when he was in his prime, had back issues that made him, like, you know, that it talk like no man. But you talk to Shane McGrath, who we used to have on the show, you talk to any of them, you talk to any of those Tip lads, the way they talk about Eoin Kelly like he's Christy Ring, you know, and he wasn't too far off it. I'm not suggesting that's mad or anything, but I don't think there's a national appreciation for how good Eoin Kelly is. And to see him still do it is why we love Club GAA. I hope he does it for another 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of think, like, I think there's something nice about the fact that it's nearly like it's an internal secret that you appreciate them and that it doesn't get the national coverage. Like, when I first started playing senior football, Pat Fallon, the old Mayo midfielder, was still, but he was our manager. But every single year, without fail, we'd be in a relegation final, and every single year, without fail, Pat Fallon would come on midfield and save the day. And he did it over and over and over, well into his 40s. Eventually, our junior team in relegation trouble, he dropped down to junior, took that team, and also played midfield on that team as well, and saved them too. So he was just that kind of guy. Like, he would always have that ability. And I used to get a real kick out of the fact that this kind of Mayo legend, that nobody knew that this Mayo legend was like a hero, an absolute hero in Barna. That at the time, you know, it was 2014. They got the county semi-final that year, so they'd been relegation finals for like probably 5 years before that, and another 5 years after that. But that year he took him on as manager and got them there, and there was a real appreciation locally for what this guy did. And it was nearly something like, you know, I was glad that, like, you know, national papers were ringing me, asking me about like what's going on down there, because it was just something that was, as long as they're valued locally, which, you know, Eoin Kelly clearly is. Mossy Quinn, like, another example, is a hero to Local Vincent's. I think that is there's something nice about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we'll leave it at that. There is a good bit of GAA to watch this weekend. Do watch it. I think I didn't let Maurice talk about it. There isn't time, but the Antrim County final is one that everybody should watch.
It's a bucket list for me. Yeah,
it's live on TG Carter. That's going to be, like, first of all, their games, if you watched any of the county games this year, were all brilliant anyway. You know what I mean? And great atmospheres and so on and so forth. And it's just going to be a cracker. Can't wait for that. Me and Maurice will be back. We'll have guests on as well as we go through this series. We had a lot to get off our chest today, so we said we'd just do it between them. But we'll be back early next week, and we'll be here with you, as I said, like on regular intervals throughout the winter. But thanks a million for joining us. Thanks a million to Maurice, staying up late in Melbourne. He loves talking about GAA, though. He doesn't mind. It doesn't matter. It could be 3:00 in the morning there, and he'd still want to go another 20 minutes, you know. So Stay tuned to all Balls.ie channels. We have lots of stuff on our Sports Direct Clubhouse for the club game and in our general GAA section as well. So lots of GAA coverage there, and we will see you soon.